Hey everybody, my name is Emily Sweeney. I'm with the Boston Globe, and I want to thank you all for joining us for this episode of 3 Requests, 3 Stories. This webinar is part of our ongoing series on New England state public records laws, and you can check out our previous episodes on the New England First Amendment Coalition's YouTube channel and also their website at nefac.org. That's nefac.org. And there's a great multimedia freedom of information guide that's definitely worth checking out. This video series is brought to you by NEFAC with support from the Society of Professional Journalists Foundation, MuckRock, SBJ New England, and the New England Society of News Editors. And leading today's session, we have Samantha Hogan from the Maine Monitor. Thank you, Samantha.
Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. I can't see you, but thank you so much for joining me this evening to talk about public records, which is something that I'm really passionate about. So 3 requests, 3 stories. Here are 3 things that you can do in Maine with our public record laws to find out more information about what your government is doing. So the first thing that I would absolutely suggest to anyone that is considering making a public records request is to first read the Freedom of Access Act, which is Maine's public records law. It's not long, it's not complicated, and it will actually give you a really good idea of what records you are able to request and what the government might actually already have explicitly said that they're required to give you. So if you just look up Freedom of Access Act statute, it will take you right to the government's website. It will take you here and you can click through and read it. And what's really great about reading the statute first before you make your first public records request is it lets you know the rules and it also lets you know your rights. So one of the things that you should be aware of is that the government is required to acknowledge that they received your request within 5 business days. So that does not include weekends, that does not include holidays. So Columbus Day, they might not count it if you put one in if you're really inspired by tonight's presentation. But they must acknowledge that they've received it within 5 days. And unfortunately, in Maine's law, one of its weaknesses is that this is really the only timeline that they are bound by. They have to give you a reasonable estimate of when they'll be able to put together these records and how much it will probably cost to do that. But they're not required to give it to you within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, like some other states have required. Then they're also able to charge you up to $15 an hour after your first free hour to redact those records or to review them to make sure that they can be released. And that actually went up to $25 on October 1st, as one of the public information officers so nicely told me this past week. So they are aware of that. They might charge you more money. That's really sad. That is the cap. They definitely could provide you records for less, but I have not seen it. But there are agencies that are definitely good about giving records out for free. We do have a state ombudsman. Her name is Brenda Keelty, and she's there to advocate for you within the Attorney General's office. So if you're having a problem with a county official, with a local official, with a state legislator not giving you records that you believe are public records, you can go to her. She also is there to help protect you if you feel like you're improperly being blocked from a public meeting. So she is definitely a resource that I think that everyone should know about. You can email her, her information's all online. And then finally, if you really are being blocked from getting access to records, you do have the right to appeal that in court. And the Maine Monitor, which is the nonprofit news organization that I work for, did in fact sue the state in 2020 to get them to release a lot of data on our public defense system and looking at how much lawyers were being compensated for what types of cases when they were representing people that could not afford to hire their own lawyers. Now, we spent $10,000 on that lawsuit, which is not the most pricey lawsuit that I've ever heard of, but by no means is a drop in the bucket. So it is a path, but it does cost money. So always try and go those free routes first. So let's jump right into it. What is the first kind of records that you can ask for? Emails are my absolute favorite kind of records to ask for because it gives you a real insight into what someone is thinking around the time that a decision is being made. And quite often, think about how how much you use email in your day-to-day life and how candid and quick you are with your responses. And it can be a really good way to start a reporting project, or to also just find out what someone's candid beliefs on a subject are. Now, there's two ways to go about requesting emails, and I've given you two examples here. So in the first one, I knew exactly who had sent the email. I knew who the two likely recipients were, and I knew what date that email was sent on. And I knew roughly what the context of it was, and I just needed it in order to move forward with a little bit more reporting. So I requested that email. Within an hour, I had it for free. It was very clearly a public record. I knew I had identified it correctly. They were able to easily find it within that free first hour, and I was given it. I was able to move on with my day. It was great. However, sometimes you don't know what you're looking for. You just know that there's a topic out there that's like really interesting, something that there's been a lot of public discourse on, or maybe you're only hearing background rumblings on it, and you want to know what a local official knows about that topic. Well, this is where I kind of like think of a drag net. And this is a more time-consuming and a more costly approach to finding out what might be in emails. But you can request emails by their domain. And what I mean is the words that follow the @ sign in an email address. So Maine.gov emails are subject to public record laws most of the time because those are their government email addresses. And then, so I made a request for a certain agency to use their @maine.gov email addresses to search for certain keywords, and those keywords appearing near to each other, which was something that the Office of Information Technology told me that they're able to do, and I'm sharing with you that they're able to do. And so what they did is they narrowed it down to a set of like 15 to 25 email addresses within that agency I was interested in. They ran those keyword searches, they reviewed it, they redacted it. They charged me $200, and I got a lot of records back that were really, really helpful for my reporting project. So if there was also something that you were really, really interested in, where there is a state agency that's been heavily involved in that topic, and you know some specific words that would make those emails jump out and not just be your normal run-of-the-mill ones, this is a good way about going about it, of finding those records if you have the ability to pay, because this is most likely not going to be free. It is going to take several hours for an agency to do that. But going back to my first request where I got that first email for free really quick, this was the record that I got. This was all that they had to find for me. It was very straightforward. They redacted one piece of information. That was his personal cell phone number, and that is because it's not allowed to be released according to that agency's statute. That's okay. I could look it up other ways, and I had an email address to contact this guy. What I did was I wrote this story. So one email does not equal a whole story, but I had found out that there was a phone call that had taken place between a person that was being held at Somerset County Jail and between his attorney. It had been recorded. It shouldn't have been. It had been released to the Attorney General's office, and a prosecutor had heard it before this case had settled. This was causing a huge amount of panic within the legal community because they did not know how far spread this problem was. I was able to get a story out there rather quickly, explaining what the situation was, what the unknowns were, and then I was able to continue reporting from there. So another type of record that you can ask for is data, which I love. And a simple example of that is payments. We love to know what the government's doing with money. So why not get the receipts, quite literally. So I made this request to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Office and the Cumberland County Jail for a list of payments that they had received from a vendor that they were contracted with. And so, as you can see in my letter, it was 2016 to present. I think I sent this early in 2021. So we're talking about like roughly 5 years of data, something that you can show a trend with. And we're saying specifically what vendor it was Securus Technologies, and we're saying what organization in the Cumberland County government we were working with, which was the Cumberland County Jail. And another thing that you should be aware of in Maine's public records laws is that you are able to get records in their native format. So what does that mean? It essentially means however the record is already stored. If it's a Word document, if it's a PDF, if it's an Excel spreadsheet, you should be able to get the record in that form. And this is really, really helpful because there's nothing worse than getting numbers as PDFs. You can overcome that hurdle, but it's a lot easier if they give you the spreadsheet as a spreadsheet that you can do calculations on, okay? So you'll see down at the bottom I circled that I wanted specific kinds of format for my data. And you'll see those are just extensions of Excel files, or I offered to give them a CSV file. CSV is a comma separated variable. Excel can open a CSV file. So that was absolutely fine. I told them though the PDFs were not acceptable because I knew I wanted to make calculations off this data. Well, lo and behold, they did have it in spreadsheet format, as you would expect anyone that's tracking checks coming into your government to be able to do. So I got this lovely spreadsheet of all this information. It actually goes on a lot longer than this because they were getting monthly checks for the past 5 years. You'll see that it's not the same consistent amount. So it was really important that we be able to do some calculations on this. And what we ultimately showed, because we sent this request to all 15 jails, was that Maine had been paid $3.3 million at least in the past 5 years through revenue sharing agreements for their phone contracts. And these were the phones that inmates were allowed to use in order to call family members and to call their attorneys. And I heard some gut-wrenching stories from families who were saying that they were really struggling to pay for these 15-minute phone calls because that's when it cuts off. But that's things I learned during the reporting of it all. And so we wrote a really compelling story. There was a bill that was in the legislature that was thinking about lowering the cost or capping the cost of these phone calls moving forward. And so this was a really good way to put it into perspective for people how much money the counties were making off of these contracts, and that it was not something that they were losing money on, but in fact they were making money on. What's really great with data as well is you can make charts. Who doesn't love a nice chart? It's a really visual way to tell you what has been going on. And so you can see Cumberland County Jail, which was the data that I showed you, had made the most money off of this contract, but by no means were the other counties making small amounts. They were making a significant amounts of money. This is just 1 year in 2019. And I think this was a good use of that data in a public record as well. So this one's a little bit more tricky, but I wanted to bring this one up because I do think that often we want to know more about the people we're either electing to office or the people that are running agencies. And so the state government is not a black box, okay? You can find out certain information about state government employees and about politicians. And so the most important thing to do when you have a question is to go and read the Bureau of Human Resources statute and find out what they are mandated to report to the legislature. So that's a document that they've already created. That's really important when it comes to public record laws. You're looking for things that already exist. So you're looking for, I wanted to know whether there were any complaints and whether there were any investigations that they were mandated already to report to the legislative body. I'm having a struggle saying that word tonight. And then I also wanted to look at the hiring applications of a specific employee. Why? Well, I was working on a story and I was really interested on this guy named Matho because he was convicted of felony larceny in Connecticut in 2010 for allegedly stealing an estimated $25,000 worth of medical equipment and cleaning equipment from a hospital. And then he had also threatened, during the investigation of this, he had threatened to harm several of the employees that he was working with. He ratted on them, if they ratted on him, sorry. And I wanted to know whether or not one of the state agencies here in Maine had this information on hand when they hired him, because he was now reviewing financial information for vulnerable poor defendants at a courthouse. And then In that same story, I was also looking at dozens of attorneys who were working as lawyers for these vulnerable individuals who had been suspended, reprimanded, or disbarred by our state licensing agency. So just two different groups of people I was interested in where I knew these records might be helpful. So for Nicholas Matho, I did end up receiving two different versions of his resume. And unsurprisingly, the hospital that I knew where he had worked and had been fired and had the larceny charges from were not listed on either of his resumes. And I was like, okay, well, that's a red flag right away. But what he said he was doing in the meantime, in the years where he should have been working at that hospital, I found this other place, and just leads to other interesting questions. It definitely raised truthfulness and trustworthiness questions for me that I think are important to always just ask yourself about people. And then with the attorneys, I also ended up receiving certain applications from a state agency. And one gentleman who I was interested in, who had been an attorney for the state for a while, he had been found to have exposed himself to two women, and he had been convicted of indecent exposure, which is usually safe for public urination, but it just raised a lot of red flags for me. And it turned out when I got his application, he had actually applied to represent people in sex offense cases, and he had disclosed that he had been reprimanded, but he said that they were activities unbecoming of a lawyer, not directly to involve to his practice of law. Well, one of the people that he had exposed himself to was a client. So these raised a lot of really important questions for me, definitely things that I thought that the public would be really interested in. And what also jumped out to me was the handwritten notes by the executive director at the time that he was being granted waivers to work on certain cases. So it just, these are, when people aren't talking to you, or if agencies aren't talking to you, sometimes getting applications and seeing what people are putting out there or not putting out there can be really revealing about their character. And so what I ended up ultimately doing was writing a multi-part series with ProPublica's local reporting network. The series is called Defenseless, and it's available on the mainmonitor.org. And we looked and what we ultimately found out was that 26% of the attorneys that were hired by Maine's public defense system had been reprimanded, suspended, or disbarred within the last decade, which was the entire time that the agency had existed. And there were a lot of concerning suspensions of attorneys or reprimands of attorneys for sexual acts. And we were assigning these people to be lawyers for people that had no option to pay for an attorney. So it just raised a lot of really important questions. And what ultimately happened was the executive director resigned after we published this piece. And the agency has a new executive director. He's really committed to reform. And so while it might be like sometimes uncomfortable topics to be looking into and to be reporting on, it can have a really profound public impact. And I'm not saying that anyone has to go out there and write a multi-thousand word piece to use our public record laws, but that is, sometimes where it really is important that we have people seeking out records so that when we want to do a big investigation like this, government officials know that they have to hand over records. So persistence pays off. I hope no one was wearing headphones because that was really loud. I apologize. Persistence pays off. Do not let public officials just ignore you. You've read the public records law. You've sent in your request. Now you have to follow up with them. And one of the best recommendations that I ever received from a mentor was, he's like, just copy and paste your original request and put email number 2, email number 3, email number 4. And people just psychologically cannot stand that you're tracking how many times you've sent this request to them and they're ignoring you or they're not fulfilling the request. So it really works. I don't think he had ever seen anyone get past 5. And I have to say, I usually get a response at 2 or 3, even from difficult individuals. And then the other thing is stay organized. I keep a spreadsheet with every single request that I have ever sent out. I write down the date that I sent it so I can find the email. I write down who the FOA officer was, what the name of the document was so that I can find it, what office they were in, a short description of it, what the 5-day response was, and if there was any cost. And then I also have a color coding thing because it's just easier for me to look at it. Green, it's done, it's complete, I don't have to worry about it. Yellow, there were no records. Red, they denied me. It kills me to this day. And how can I rewrite that request so that I get the records? And I would also just say, reject their rejection. Fight like hell. These are public records, right? You've read the rules, you know the rules. Make them abide by the rules. If you can point to similar examples where they have released records like this in the past, that's really helpful. Or if you can point to another organization, like a comparable state agency that has released these records, often that will help you. I spent some time talking to you guys about jails that I was sending records requests to. Once I could get 1, 2, 3 jails to give me a record, it was a really strong leveraging point to the other jails to be like, look, we've already decided that this is a public record. 3 people have already given it to me. Can you just give me yours? And often I would get records back, which was really great. Also, be prepared to push back on any kind of sweeping exemption. So if you were to send a public records request into the Maine CDC, it's very possible they could claim that a lot of records are exempt because they fall under HIPAA. Well, or if you ask the Department of Education for student or school information, they might say, oh, well, that falls under FERPA. Something I run into quite often is this claim that the data is protected by trade secrets. You should always try and push back on this, reject their rejection on it. There might be a way that they can anonymize the data, or they can redact some parts of someone's name or other sensitive information so that you can get data, you can get records, you can get the person, because what you want overall is the record. If they have to take out a name, so what? And then also just remember that if the government is doing business, it's subject to FOA. If they're contracted with someone, if they've hired someone, if they're an employee, if they've done an email, if they've reached some kind of deal, like that's government business, no matter if they say it is or not. So just stand firm and remind yourself that public record laws exist to shine light on what the government is doing. And whether you're doing that as a private citizen who's interested in a specific topic, or if you're a journalist and you're writing a story that will help inform the broader public, there's always a reason to seek out public records. And I strongly recommend that you do. And my name is Samantha Hogan. This is my email address, this is my phone number. If you have questions, or if you get stuck on something and you want to just brainstorm, I'm happy to answer any questions at a later time, but I'm also happy to answer any questions that people might have right now.
Sam, thank you so much. This was so informative. And actually, those tips about email number 1, number 2, number 3, I'm totally going to start using that starting tomorrow.
Yes.
That's good. And also I wasn't really aware of, requesting, emails, but using the little asterisk, you know what I mean? Before the domain.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Great stuff. But I want to thank everybody who tuned in, and we're going to be posting this on YouTube, so more people will be tuning in. And Sam, I want to thank you so much. This was so informative. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everybody did too. So awesome. Thank you.
Thanks so much, guys.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.